But first to Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. Despite the dreadful announcement that the flight is lost without hope of survivors, questions remain. How could Flight 370 fly so far undetected? And what does all this say about Australia's ability to identify aircraft and, in a worst-case scenario, deal with an attack? We'll hear shortly from an expert panel that includes the former head of our Defence Force. But first, here's Mark Davis.
We are trying our very best.
For more than a fortnight, the Malaysian Defence Minister has been facing up to a barrage of criticism. Distraught families have been repeatedly asking one very pointed question that echoes with all Malaysians. How could Malaysia's military surveillance systems not see a large plane simply because its transponders were not on? In the wake of Flight MH370, the same question could be asked of Singapore, Indonesia and now Australia. How could a 64-metre plane fly down Australia's west coast and remain apparently unseen by the Australian military? Are our aerial surveillance systems any better than those of Malaysia and its immediate neighbours? Conventional radar used in and around Australian cities cover close-range incoming flights. They're highly vulnerable to missing low-flying planes and offer at most a 30-minute warning of a possibly hostile craft. The system might offer a small response window in a 9/11 situation, but it wouldn't see a plane like Flight 370 approaching at a distance. That scenario is meant to be covered by the Jindalee Operational Radar Network, or JORN. JORN operates so-called over-the-horizon coverage by bouncing signals off the ionosphere. It's far more sophisticated than normal radar, can see great distances and should capture low-flying craft. Theoretically, Flight 370 should have come within Jindalee's limited gaze if it approached from the northwest. Australia is also home to the super surveillance system of the region, Pine Gap. The secret American facility not only reportedly sucks up communications from half the globe, but many have assumed that its satellites see and record everything in their gaze. Would Pine Gap have seen Flight 370? And if it had, would we know about it? Flight 370 tested the surveillance capacity of our neighbours, and it seems they failed. Can the same be said of Australia? And to discuss these questions further, I'm joined by Admiral Chris Barry here in the studio, former Chief of the Australian Defence Force. In Canberra, Associate Professor Clinton Fernandez, a former Army officer and now intelligence expert lecturing at the Australian Defence Force campus of the University of New South Wales. Ken Christensen is an aviation analyst. For more than 20 years, he was a specialist navigator with both NASA and US Air Force Special Operations. He joins us from San Francisco. But first to Admiral Chris Barry. Admiral, if you were Chief of the Malaysian Defence Forces at the moment, or the Singaporean one for that matter, would you be concerned about events of the last few weeks?
I think I would be, because all the assets, military assets, civilian assets, should have been brought into play and international cooperation sought well before.
Earlier than
Much earlier.
Well, as a defence planner, though, would it concern you that you have a plane zigzagging in and out of your airspace, apparently, and no one's seeing it?
Well, that's always going to be of concern. Unidentified aircraft movements, something that we are alerted to, and we do what we can to intercept them and find out who they are. But we know this goes on, and unfortunately, I think, as this incident shows us, maybe it's time this has got to stop.
I think it's been the subtext of everyone's concern in this issue, not just the people on that plane, but how easy it has been to go undetected. You turn the transponder off, you fly low. It's like a World War II movie.
Well, this is one of the this could turn out to be one of the world's great mysteries. I hope not for the family's sake. I hope that they get some resolution.
Clinton, has this been a failure of surveillance in the neighbourhood? And indeed, has it been a failure of surveillance right here in Australia?
No, I don't think so. I think that our surveillance assets are functioning in the manner for which they were designed. There is simply no problem when it comes to the air defences or the surveillance of Australia. The aircraft itself wasn't expected, and therefore it wasn't on any kind of flight path. There was no request for information given to the radar operators to track it. Had that been the case, we would have spotted it. It's just that we don't look for this sort of thing.
But from a military point of view, I mean, that people don't always signal their punches, do they? I mean, is it concerning that something can approach the Australian coastline, indeed, if the pundits are right, fly down the entire coastline and not be seen, either in real time or when you look back at the data?
Yeah, you know, the radar is not some kind of invisible force field that surrounds Australia. It's simply electromagnetic energy that has to be tuned in order to detect the kind of plane that you want. And in a sense, it is cued by the intelligence. A radar operator can look on their screen and see all kinds of stuff out there. It's what you're looking for that matters.
Ken Christensen, from an American perspective, and indeed from a flight navigator's perspective, does it seem perplexing to you that a flight could be not detected so readily through such a large part of the ocean?
Yes, I mean, it's always problematic when you have aircraft, particularly where Australia is located. I mean, it's surrounded by water. On one aspect, that's excellent that your enemies don't get close to you. On another aspect, if it's a situation like this, then you do need coastal radar everywhere, because if this, in fact, aircraft did take this route, this could be just a rogue aircraft and it just happens to walk in. And walk in unintentionally or intentionally, in most countries' air defence want to detect that.
Well, Admiral, I mean, does it concern you that our west coast in particular seems almost free of high-tech radar coverage? We don't have any over-the-horizon coverage there at all. Could someone just merely, a hostile act, fly in through the west coast? Well,
there are ground-based radars, of course, but their range is normally not big enough. And of course, we all know if you go from, say, Broome up to Darwin, there's a great big gap there.
Sure. Does that worry you? I mean, this was news to me. I think it was sort of news to a lot of the Australian population.
Well, I think if you sat back and thought about this for a minute, you'd realise this is the fact. Would one aircraft coming in present a threat, and where is it going? What will we know about it? Might come as part of the intelligence picture.
Okay. Clinton, the other facility that people often refer to here is Pine Gap. We see it as the super eye in the sky. But
yes, I could just pick up.
Would it have seen something like this flight? And if it did, would they tell us?
Pine Gap is a ground control station for satellites. So if the plane had exploded in midair, then definitely
it would see the flash.
Absolutely, yeah, sure. But apart from that, Pine Gap is not designed to simply follow anything at random in the southern Indian Ocean.
There's a lot of snippets of information that seem to be coming from different countries, Admiral. Does it seem to you that there's a coyness from various nations, including Australia, America, China, about revealing as much as they know and delivering this information quite late?
I think you could never discount the possibility, but I don't think countries would hold back on this, frankly. I think what we want is resolution. We want to know what happened to this aeroplane, because until we do, families are really going to be quite troubled. And I think the international aviation community would dearly love to know what has happened so we can make preparations.
I think we'd all like to know, and it just something seems a little bit incompetent here to me. I mean, 18 days, multiple...
Yeah, I agree that it's taken far too long to get this level of international cooperation and get these things going. And of course, the longer you wait, the more dispersed any wreckage is going to be, the harder it's going to be to find out where the black box is.
And the horrifying thought, at some point there could have been people alive in the ocean.
Correct.
Ken, what lessons have you taken from this?
We learned on September 11th what commercial aircraft can do, and we had a hard lesson. Regardless if that aircraft is in the South Indian Ocean, this is a lesson to heed and take necessary precautions to potentially close up any gaps or in anybody's national air defense.
Ken, if this plane was approaching the American coastline, or if had approached the American coastline, even at the distance that it is from Australia at the moment, would you have known about it?
At the distance, I mean, you're talking about
let's say 1,000
3 hours before they hit landfall. So that's considerably further out. If it's closer in, though, yes, and we would have ample time to notify a fighter base, and they would be able to take a fighter up, intercept, and identify and take aggressive action if necessary.
Admiral, would you share that concern about the prospect of a civilian aircraft approaching Australia on the west coast undetected? Is that a concern amongst your colleagues or your former colleagues?
Well, you can easily paint a scenario where somebody who was inimical to your interests might do this, but I think, as Clinton has already indicated, we have to queue our assets using the intelligence network. So we rely on that, because,
except for the rogue
this
attack.
is not the North American air defence system, and that is a terrific system, and it's pretty much 100% guaranteed. We just don't have that luxury.
I'll leave it there. Thanks to each of you for joining us.